Secretary of State Antony Blinken is speaking to reporters after meeting with the Iraqi Deputy Prime Minister. Let's listen.
Over the weekend, as you know, Iran launched hundreds of missiles and drones against Israel. This was an attack unprecedented in its scope and in its scale. In its scope, because it represented the first direct attack by Iran on Israel. And its scale, because, as I said, there were more than 300 munitions fired, including ballistic missiles, as well as land attack cruise missiles and drones. Thanks to Israeli air defenses, as well as support from other countries, including U.S. military assets, virtually all of the incoming projectiles were destroyed and shot down. As President Biden underscored to Prime Minister Netanyahu, the U.S. is committed to Israel's defense. And I think what this weekend demonstrated is that Israel did not have to and does not have to defend itself alone when it is the victim of an aggression, the victim of an attack. In the 36 hours since, we have been coordinating a diplomatic response to seek to prevent escalation. Strength and wisdom need to be the same sides, the different sides of the same coin. I've been in close communication with counterparts in the region, and we will continue to do so in the hours and days ahead. We don't seek escalation, but we'll continue to support the defense of Israel and to protect our personnel in the region. Now, for today, let me say how pleased we are to...
All right, you've been listening to the Secretary of State Antony Blinken. He's delivering some remarks on Iran's attack on Israel over the weekend. CBS News contributor Andrew Boyd is joining us now. He's the former chief of operations in the CIA's Counterterrorism Mission Center. You just heard there, Andrew, the Secretary of State reiterating not only the United States support for Israel, and because part of the way that Israel was able to deflect all of that barrage of missiles and drones was with aid from the U.S. and other allies in the region. But talk to us about one of the things that I find really kind of remarkable about this is it seems as if for the first time in quite some time, it's not just the Israelis that are directly attacking Iran on Iranian soil. That's happened before, albeit perhaps clandestinely, but that Iran is directly attacking Israel proper and not through its proxies. Does that change the paradigm of what's happening in the region now?
It does in part, but it shouldn't. The intent should not be to start a regional war or a war that drags in the United States and its allies. And I think the reason the Iranians attacked directly against the Israelis, by using proxies, is because of the alleged, and again I use alleged because the Israelis have not officially taken credit for it, but the attack in Damascus against the facility in Damascus where Mohammad Reza Zahedeh, the brigadier general in charge of IRGC Quds Force operations in the region, and several other senior officers were killed. Again, those officers are combatants. They've been conducting covert war and overt war at times against the Israelis and U.S. forces in Iraq. So the idea that was an attack against a diplomatic facility, I just don't buy that claim. But in the Iranian mind, it was an escalation, and they responded in kind. Now, they responded with a fairly significant public relations message that preceded that because they don't want escalation. They cannot handle a direct war with Israel. And every single one of the drones, or as Secretary Blinken just said, the overwhelming majority, the vast majority of them were shot down. So we're in a pause here. As I understand it, the Israeli War Cabinet is meeting regarding next steps, and we'll see how that goes. But I do think, again, as Secretary Blinken has stated and President Biden has stated, we're trying to avoid escalation.
So let's talk about what the War Cabinet may be weighing. They met. They didn't come to a conclusion other than that there will be a response. What are some of the factors they're going to be considering?
Well, I think, as Americans, we have to not mirror image what the Israeli War Cabinet and our own National Security Council would do something different. We have different capacities. We have a much larger military than the Israelis, and we're also not fighting a multi-front war as the Israelis are in Hamas, and then defending northern Israel against Hezbollah. So I don't think they need a public relations stunt, the Israelis, with a massive attack against Iran. They are contemplating retaliation, but I really think the shock and awe, so to speak, came on Saturday with the Israelis again, along with allies, along with the Jordanians, the United States Air Force, defending Israel and shooting down just about every drone and missile and having no casualties on the ground. That was awe-inspiring. And so the Israelis should really not be considering another awe-inspiring attack on Iran, but they should be focusing on potentially degrading Iranian capability in the region, and also having deterrence. And you can deter and degrade capability in a variety of ways that don't involve a direct air attack or missile attack against the Iranian regime.
Let me ask you a question that we raised with Samantha Vinograd, who's a CBS News national security contributor, worked in multiple administrations in counterterrorism for the Department of Homeland Security, about the Netanyahu effect. In other words, there are some suggesting that Prime Minister Netanyahu, in an attempt to deflect from his own internal struggles within Israel, and plus that with the inability, such as it exists, to bring some of those hostages home, has used this attack as a pretense to continue staying in power. No doubt that the Iranians, no doubt anticipating that the Iranians would strike back in the way that they did, based on that provocative action that you mentioned at that embassy in Damascus. What do you make of that analysis?
I mean, there can be a bit of a wag the dog effect. I mean, I don't think that was exactly the reason they attacked Damascus. I mean, the IRGC Quds Force has been a menace to Israel, has been a menace to the United States and our forces in the region, and that was an appropriate attack. What it has done is it's taken Gaza off the front, the headlines for the time being, and I do think that is beneficial to Netanyahu, because the stain of the October 7th murder of 1,200 Israelis, and what that all meant from the hostage perspective is not on the front line, front page right now, and that benefits Netanyahu in a lot of ways. You know what
Vlad is sort of alluding to, though, is the impact of politics, which we have here in this country as well. We've just been covering this morning some CBS News polling, asking Americans how they feel about how the Biden administration is handling this. And what you find is that increasingly over time, fewer and fewer Americans are happy with the way President Biden has handled this. So I want to ask you, as the U.S. moves forward, what sort of strategy could be considered, especially when you factor in that, we got an election in November?
I mean, I think the administration has been pretty clear. We are going to stand with our allies in Israel. Differences between President Biden and Bibi Netanyahu aside, we are going to stand with our allies in Israel. I mean, Netanyahu does have constraints both on his right flank politically and his left flank. Benny Gantz, the former commander of the IDF, is in this war cabinet meeting, and Netanyahu and Benny Gantz are not political allies, and so Netanyahu has constraints too. President Biden's political constraints are what they are, but I do not think this administration is going to abandon our Israeli allies on the Gaza issue, on the Hamas issues, or on the broader defense of Israel against threats from Iran and its proxies such as Hezbollah.
All right, Andrew Boyd, thank you very much for your analysis. We appreciate it.
Thank you for your time.
Well, the U.S. is trying to strike a delicate balance between defending Israel and avoiding a wider war in the Middle East. Earlier on CBS Mornings, White House National Security Communications Advisor John Kirby spoke about the state of U.S. influence in the region.
I think another way of looking at this is they didn't. I mean, they meant to cause casualties. They meant to cause extensive damage inside Israel, and they didn't. And the reason they didn't was because the United States and partners came to help to defend Israel. We came to their assistance, and we knocked down just about everything that the Iranians threw up into the sky. And as the president told Prime Minister Netanyahu on the phone Saturday night, this was an extraordinary success.
Well, let's bring in Chief White House Correspondent Nancy Cordes to talk a little bit more about how the White House is responding. So, Nancy, what is the White House most focused on right now?
What they're most focused on, Anne-Marie, is preventing any kind of escalation between Israel and Iran that could spread to the rest of the region. That is their major concern. The president was on the phone all weekend talking to world leaders with an eye towards trying to prevent another tit-for-tat, a reaction by Israel that then Iran would have to respond to. And so basically the case that they've been making to Israel is twofold. First of all, and you heard it there from John Kirby, they are arguing that what we saw this weekend was a spectacular defeat, in their words, of Iran, that Iran tried to send this barrage of drones and missiles, and that they were essentially all shot down. There was very little damage in Israel, and that this was a big win for Israel. It exposes that Iran's military is no match for Israel's and for the allies that also came to Israel's defense. And so therefore, Israel doesn't need to respond. But they are also warning Israel, and President Biden made this warning directly to Prime Minister Netanyahu over the weekend. Hey, if you do launch a retaliatory strike against Iran, the U.S. is not going to participate. Yes, the U.S. participated in your defense, but we will not help you strike Iran directly.
So there's new CBS News polling, and it shows an increasing number of Americans want Joe Biden to encourage Israel to stop military actions in Gaza. Walk us through the White House's sort of actions and how they're kind of being interpreted by Americans. We talked about this poll earlier today during the 7 o'clock, and I thought to myself, he's become increasingly critical of Israel, but
Right.
Americans are saying that that's not good enough, at least according to our polling.
Right. Such a difficult situation for this White House. You know, for decades, it has been, an unspoken rule of politics, particularly here in Washington, that you always support Israel. And yet, what our polling is showing is that Americans at this point in time, particularly Democrats, have real doubts. Just look at the approval ratings for President Biden's handling of the Israel-Hamas conflict over the past 6 months. They have dropped from 44% of Americans approving down to 33%. Another really eye-opening poll finding over the weekend from our CBS News poll, Anne-Marie, Democrats were asked whether they sympathize with the Israeli people. Well, back in October, 44% of Democrats said that they do. Now it's only 32%. And you also had a lot of Democrats in our polling saying that the U.S. shouldn't be sending any more weapons to Israel. So that really shows the challenge that this White House has on a week like this, where they, like so many Israeli allies around the world, were coming to Israel's defense to fend off this attack by Iran, even as Americans and particularly members of the president's own party are saying they feel very uncomfortable with Israel's conduct in its conflict with Hamas, and they believe President Biden should be doing something different.
All right, Nancy, thank you.